Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hey Stu, how are you?
Hey, yeah, I'm not too bad. How are you?
Well, I'm all right, but we've decided to start this one a little bit differently, haven't we? With a bit of a warning. What do you think about the words that we've put up there, Stu? Let's let our lovely viewers guess, where did those words that we've put up and those phrases come from?
Well, is it the pub? Is it at the football? Or is it language sometimes directed at conveyancers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really appalling. And I'm hoping this is the last time we talk about stamp duty, land tax deadlines, but I do think it's relevant because of the stress that everyone's under according to our clients. But what I really wanted, us to air today and maybe to think about, Stu, is, have the boundaries of acceptability been broken in terms of, how clients now think it's acceptable to talk to their conveyancers? So that's my question, really. Are the boundaries broken?
I think the answer is yes, isn't it? I think it's quite simple. From sort of, my experience, especially over the last couple of weeks with the next stamp duty holiday coming up, we all know how frustrated clients can get. We all know the implications of something not going before the end of the month. But it's sometimes the way in which we're pushed and spoken to. And in my experience, when clients ask my guys here to help, that's never frowned upon. But I have to say, the last week or so, crikey, been called some names.
Yeah, well, and I think that's the really important thing. And that, I think it's a really serious point. That all the words that we've put on the screen are phrases that have been, to our knowledge, used against conveyancers by their clients literally in the last couple of weeks. We aren't talking years, we aren't talking months, and also I think rather sadly we're not talking an infrequent occurrence there, Stu, are we? We're talking about something that actually now the abuse that conveyancers have to put up with, well, do they have to, from their clients is a regular thing now. It's just become a regular thing.
Yeah, it seems to be as like an analogy, isn't there, when celebrities are trolled on social media and things like that. We're almost getting into this kind of arena. We're kind of bombarded. Some of my guys have been trolled on social media via their sort of personal accounts, things like that. And there's a line, like you say, and it seems to have gone well over it.
Yeah, and I think, and I know we talked about this when we first thought about doing Conveyancing Matters, Stu. And one of the things we both talked about from a sort of different angle was, you and I personally are now putting ourselves out there. Yeah. And we are sort of setting ourselves up in a way for somebody to come back, and have a go at us. And we personally accepted that as a potential risk, and still thought it was worth doing Conveyancing Matters. And it's certainly turned out to be the case. Somebody, I know that, some people have had a pop at you on social media recently, Stu, but ironically, they weren't even your clients, I believe.
Ironically, not only are they not our clients, the ironic part of it is we're waiting for their lawyers. But that's not something that's unusual or even uncommon. No. Like you said, even the weekend gone, I had two people contact me that weren't our clients. And of course, it's so difficult because we can't tell them the exact position. We can't tell them we're waiting on your lawyer. They haven't supplied the management company sales pack, or we can't, we can't divulge that kind of information for fear of creating a conflict. So it's a real difficult position that you're in. And, we do actually tell our clients that they're not to contact other lawyers. You can't obviously, control it, but it's a real difficult point, isn't it? And it's extremely difficult. We're always told, I've spoken to the seller's lawyer, and you think, well, have you actually spoken to them?
Yeah, doubt it very much.
They haven't. They never have they? A lawyer's not going to speak to other clients. So,
well, one hopes. I mean, what I was going to go on to say actually is that you and I have put ourselves out there, and in a sense, that's our risk that we've agreed to sort of agreed and accepted. But your staff being sort of subjected to personal insult and personal abuses on social media and being that's a completely different thing. And that I don't think anybody trolling any of us is acceptable, don't get me wrong, but I think you and I sort of have accepted that, well, you know, that maybe is a bit of a side effect of what we do because we're speaking out. But you know, for your staff to be targeted is more than reprehensible, really.
Oh, you know, absolutely. We've had instances where our staff have been targeted, where language being used towards them has been abusive, homophobic, racist comments. We've had all of that. We have a zero tolerance policy, zero tolerance. You know, we were more forgiving years ago, maybe if a clients would swear. But now, you know, any abusive behavior towards our staff, homophobic comments, racism, anything like that, that's it. Disinstruct straight away. We don't.
And is that irrespective of how far through the transaction you are?
Yeah. I mean, luckily, it's not happened when a matter's exchanged. And we always make a big point of saying to the client that, you know, you give this to a law firm, we'll aid the transition in taking our file direct to them, so you will not suffer a loss as a result of us disinstructing. But there has to be that line now. And, you know, I think the world's changed with accessibility, and, you know, hopefully standards in society are, you know, improving with regards to things like racism. It's obviously very topical at the moment. So for me, yeah, you've got to show that willing to staff. I've got absolutely no problem with anybody, you know, trolling me or having a pop at me. You know, that's what you take on the chin. And like you say, by doing a podcast or a video like this, you know, you're potentially going to get a bit of grief, but it's when it's your staff, you know, at the end of the day, people have lost sight that we are only trying to help. We are only trying to get them over the line. And what we do is actually protecting them in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that completely lost sight. And what really disappoints me as well is that, you know, we set out the retainer that we have with the client right at the onset. There's no surprise. We set out the retainer, what we're going to do, how long we think it's going to take, you know, what they should expect of us, what we should expect of you. And what we should expect of you as a client is that our staff don't have to suffer any kind of abuse. You know, they come into a workplace where they should feel safe. We've had, and I've sent you this, a recording before where we've even had, you know, sort of our staff threatened that somebody's going to come down the. We've actually had it twice. We've had staff threatened, and we've actually sent recordings to the police. We've had one of our lady staff threatened that somebody was going to come down and drive their car through her. And we've actually had a member of our staff threatened that they will be stabbed.
Which is just, I mean, it's just extraordinary and utterly reprehensible. I mean, the trouble is that, I mean, the one, you know, I had an example where I was working with probably actually one of the nicest heads of, well, the nicest head of department I've ever worked with, an utterly delightful, decent man, worked extraordinarily hard. And he was probably one of the few, obviously, apart from your lovely self, Stu, but one of the few conveyancers who I, you know, deeply liked a lot. I thought he was absolutely delightful. He was working in my office for a while. And he said to me, "Oh, Lorraine, can you deal with this file? I've got to go back to the head office." And I said, "Oh, why?" And he said, "Oh, a client's just threatened to, you know, come into the office with a machete." And I mean, the immediate reaction is almost humour, but actually it is utterly unacceptable. And one of the things that, well, two of the observations I have, Stu, and I'd be really interested to know what other members of the profession more generally have to say, but it's not behaviour that I necessarily notice when I've worked in a multidisciplinary firm. That it's not behaviour that I necessarily notice clients exhibiting towards other lawyers in other disciplines. Now, to be fair, maybe family, which is high stress, and crime, which is probably just quite different, possibly. But I didn't hear of colleagues in the probate department or the commercial department sort of saying, "Well, I've suffered, you know, abuse, you know, regular abuse at the hands of my client." So there's that aspect to it. Is it something that's more, you know, conveyancers are more prone to have to put up with, but also on a much more general level, Stu, you know, do other professionals have to put up with it? I mean, I suspect probably there's plenty of sort of doctors, dentists and accountants out there who say, well, yes. But certainly I'm not aware of the extent of it and the prevalence of it against other, you know,
I would be really,
office.
I'll be really interested if, you know, the guys that study other areas of law and practice in other areas of law come forward and agree or disagree. But I would have the same opinion as your good self. I have not seen it in any other kind of area of law. I wonder whether, you know, other areas are more contentious, things like that. So I wonder whether there's that element to it. And, you know, we purport to have the, you know, the same interest, don't we? A buyer and seller purport to have the same interest, but they actually don't. They have the same end goal, which is to buy and sell and complete. But at every step along the way, they actually don't have the same interest insofar as, you know, there's never an immediate agreement on price. There's, you know, a seller might want something to go through quicker. The buyer can't do that because they're still waiting on their mortgage offer.
Yeah.
It could be the other way around. You know, so every single step or key stage of a conveyancing transaction, the buyer and seller aren't actually in agreement, are they? It is.
No, not at all.
Conveyancing has got contentious in that respect, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's funny because I describe it as a non-contentious area of work, and of course, you know, with a litigation hat on, it is.
Yeah.
But it's confrontational potentially.
Yeah. That's a good word to use. That's a good word to use, isn't it? Yeah. Every step is almost a confrontation, you know, and, you know, a seller might be frustrated that a buyer doesn't yet have their mortgage offer, but of course the buyer might not be able to control that, or whatever the scenario may well be. They're all pressure points and frustration points, aren't they? Which,
yeah, I mean, I've learned over the years, you know, when if I've got clients who, whether on the sale or the purchase side of the fence, say, oh, well, you know, we get on ever so well with the seller or the buyer, and, you know, we've got their, you know, we're emailing them and texting them, and I go straight in right at the beginning and I say, hold back, move right away from that you don't have that much dialogue, you're perfectly happy now. But I do point out to sellers, look, be careful what you say to a buyer, you know, off, you know, out of the context of the lawyers having those discussions. But I always say to clients, you know, it might start off nice now, but when we get up to that pressure point of exchange of contracts, things can change, and you see it so often. And I tell clients, you know, not to, generally speaking, not to sort of, I don't encourage that dialogue between them. I don't encourage them to be confrontational, but that sort of, you know, pally sort of always, aren't you all lovely, you know, becomes a very different thing 6 weeks in, as you say, when a buyer still hasn't commissioned a survey, I think. But I mean, I think we've always said, and I've always trotted out, Stu, that, you know, that old cliche that, you know, after death and divorce, moving house is the third most stressful thing that people do. But I still, you know, that is still no excuse, and also doesn't explain just the prevalence of abuse that that conveyancers, certainly in the last, you know, 12, 18 months in particular, have been frankly expected to take from clients. And unless people record calls, I mean, how do you think, you know, perhaps somebody who's not particularly experienced who's sitting in their front room?
Well, our call recording now has gone from being, you know, a nicety a few years back, thinking it would be for I don't know, quality control or training purposes, stuff like that. But now it's absolutely essential, and you know, we can dial into that call, we can listen to the potentially vile language somebody might use or abusive behaviour, and we've got it there, and we can. You're
saying in your terms and conditions, Stu, you know, if you're abusive, we'll offload you and we record your calls. Yeah,
100%. I think you got to. There's always that danger, isn't there, that if you don't say that and the client, you do disinstruct and the client suffers a loss because the transaction doesn't go through as a result of it, you're on sort of dodgy water, aren't you? So
completely.
I think you've got to set that out quite clearly, and we always quite clearly state that, you know, we don't ever want to disinstruct, but we have a zero tolerance policy. We have a poster to say the same sort of thing that get right at the start: zero tolerance on that kind of thing. You know, there's moaning and there's complaining. And that's completely different, you know, a matter of opinion, stuff like that's totally different. I'm talking direct swearing at somebody, of the sort of language that you don't want to hear, and direct abuse, and threatening behaviour, or homophobic comments, racism, all of that kind of stuff, that you can't have it. You know, I think as a profession, we've got to make a stand. The interesting thing for me is, and when we sort of toe in other areas of law or professions, I wonder whether it's there's the link to going back to the same old thing, is the link the stamp duty holiday, and have those deadlines heightened the frustration. And I think you said death, divorce, and moving home. I think moving home now has been ranked, I'm sure I read something not that long ago, as the most stressful thing you can do. You know, people only do it sort of 6-7 times, is it on average? I think in the South. I'm not sure it's all over the UK that amount, but you know, it's so stressful. You know, you can understand people becoming frustrated, and you can understand, you know, people nagging us to get things through, you know, loads of calls per day, but that's different, totally different. And
it's different.
Be interesting whether it calms down after the 30th.
A stress is different to abuse, and one thing doesn't have to lead to another. I mean, I always think, and as I say, I'm absolutely showing my age here, as is frequently the case, but that I do think, you know, to an extent, social media has given everybody a platform, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's also, and you know, it's meant that there's really no consequence, I find, for people. There's actually less consequence to their poor behaviour unless you offload them. But I do also wonder whether, and this is probably maybe a sort of a cliffhanger for another day, Stu, but whether actually as a profession we've just allowed what we do to become devalued. I've seen other lawyers on Twitter who should know better, you know, talking about conveyancing work as you know, as you know, as not properly recognised decent legal work. Now, I know people will pile in and say, yeah, well, you know, it's fraught with delays and everything else and blah, blah, blah. And I think we all understand that. And I don't think you or I would ever, you know, defend the process to the death, because we know there's lots of things that can be improved. But I think when I see other fellow professionals in other disciplines, and even barristers, I might say, you know, piling in and sort of devaluing the role of property lawyer, whether you're solicitor, licensed conveyancer, you know, Filex or anything else, I really, really don't think that helps.
No, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. I think, you know, the respect for the profession is at, I would say, an all-time low, isn't it? And like you say, whether we are part of that problem, maybe we do devalue what we do. I don't know, but it is, yeah, it's a real difficult one at the moment, and it will be very interesting to see whether this improves after the 30th of September, or whether, you know, it's something that's, dare I say, here to stay.
Well, I think maybe we'll bookmark this one, Stu, to you know, maybe to review it in 6 months' time. But well, I hope that, you know, other people, just perhaps because we're talking about it, you know, maybe feel a bit more supported. But on a personal level, what I feel very strongly about is that, you know, people in firms who perhaps aren't as well supported as PCS staff are, you know, do remember that their employers owe them a duty of care, and, you know, that people working in conveyancing firms do not have to and should not be expected to put up with abuse from clients. And if they are abused by clients, then they shouldn't necessarily be engaging with the client, but should certainly feel that they, you know, can share that information immediately. I think
anybody working in a firm that is subject to any kind of, you know, proper abuse, hatred, and what we've already discussed, it's a case of reporting that to the senior partner straight away. Certainly not one to engage with. No. I would literally leave it there, report it straight away, and hope they take the appropriate action. But I think, you know, we do probably owe our profession a duty to have a zero tolerance policy on this kind of thing. Otherwise, of course, you know, I can't see it improving.
No, well, and on that rather perhaps slightly, you know, downbeat note for us, Stu, we'll bring this conveyancing matters to a close, and well, I'll see you on the other side. See you after the stamp duty holidays, Stu.
Fingers crossed.
Take care.